Hi folks, I'm Jim. This is Great Books, Big Ideas. Today we're going to talk about Vintage Contemporaries, a paperback series that began in the 1980s and continues, I think, to this very day. But I want to talk about the vintage 1980s paperbacks. What makes them special? What makes them dated a little bit? But why I think they're kind of collectible at the same time. That's next up here on Great Books, Big Ideas. So maybe you all have memories of these vintage contemporary volumes, like Cathedral, like Mohawk, and others. These popped up in the mid 1980s, if memory serves. And the big hit of this series early on, I think, was the book Bright Lights, Big City by Jay McInerney. I know I had it, and so many other people had it. And for a while, I was collecting these paperbacks and I had a nice shelf of them. And then a few years ago, we went through a major book purge, and I got rid of most of those. And I have saved just a few of them, and then I have some of the later edition vintage contemporaries. So I'm going to show you what some of these classic book designs look like, and then how they've changed a little bit. First of all, I did some research, and I'm going to link to two good web resources in the show description. The first is called the Vintage Contemporaries Bibliography, and this gives you a lot of good background, and it's actually a really good attempt to give you a list of all the vintage contemporary editions, or I don't know if it's all, but it's a lot. And you can peruse those, and it's very well annotated, and it's got screenshots, and it's really cool. And then the second web resource is an article from the New Yorker, and it's called The Artist Whose Book Covers Distilled the 1980s. And the book designer's name was Lorraine Louie. She was the designer for these vintage contemporaries, and she really defined a whole look and feel that just screams 1980, for better or worse. I think kind of for better, but let's talk about that. Anyway, have a look at those web resources. I'm going to pull some of my information from those websites. The series was started around 1984 by Gary Fiskett-John. He launched Vintage Contemporaries at Vintage Books, and the idea was to bring together contemporary American fiction and then some older reissues or reprints of what I would call mid-list books. And one example would be like Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. Like that would be a title that they reissued. But there was a lot of brand new stuff in there. And the idea was to create a look and feel, a kind of an identity. So if you bought these books, you were sort of in the know, you were up on things, you were an avid reader, and they seemed to be book covers that were not afraid to be 1980s. And so we'll look at some of these covers. I've only saved a few of the very original types, and I'll show them to you on the document cam here. So let's take a look at the first one. And that would be Cathedral by Raymond Carver. So this was probably a reissue. It originally came out in 81 or 83. First vintage books edition was 1984. So maybe that was hardcover, and then the vintage contemporaries came in right after it, or maybe they're just referring to the 1984. But Carver was, I think, still living at this point. He was really hitting his stride in terms of literary reputation. This is a fine book of short stories, and the title story is just terrific. And let's just look at some of the elements of the book design here. So you have, this sort of block of the dotted rectangle or square, You have blocky sans serif text that's very 80s, and a cover. Every title had a cover illustration, but it was sort of framed and bordered in white like this. Then you have a blurb, and then the Vintage Contemporaries logo down here, right? And then the back cover would contain more blurbs, price, and here you see the cover design by Lorraine Louie, cover photo illustration by Mark House. And the photo illustrations were very distinctive too. A lot of them had a quasi-surrealist bent. I think they kind of evoke Rene Magritte in some aspects, but it's of 80s take on surrealism. And it's a lot of them featured little quirky animals like this, and they often will make some kind of passing reference to the content of the book as well. And this particular title has these stories. A Small Good Thing is one of my favorite Raymond Carver stories. Cathedral is another favorite. And you can see these are generally like not super long books. It wasn't the only book of short stories that Carver published with Vintage Contemporaries, but that's the look. Compare that to this Richard Russo novel, Mohawk, and you can see the similarities. You can see here, you've got an author up here in the corner with the white text knocking out against a colored background. The full justification type of spaced out title in all caps. The nested book illustration. This very 80s dot matrix square logo, and blurb. Here, John Irving blurred this, says this book is too skillful for a first novel. Here's a very young Richard Russo. Haven't read Mohawk. My wife is a big Richard Russo fan, and we have most of his books, if not all of them. And I don't even think I've read any of them yet. But I did see Richard Russo live at the AWP conference in Boston about 12, 15 years ago, maybe even longer. Call it 15 years ago. And he was interesting to follow. And he's like regional fiction. A lot of his stuff takes place in upstate New York, Mohawk Valley, and up that way. Back contains a long blurb by John Irving, blurbs by Barry Hanna and Bill Buford, and this cost $6.95. The Carver cost $4.95 back in the 80s. Designed by Lorraine Louie, illustration by Rick Lovell. Pretty cool. And for my third one, let's look at Mona Simpson, Anywhere But Here. This is also a book that my wife read. I haven't read it. She's read a couple books by Mona Simpson. I think this was her favorite. This one preserves the same look, but this apparently was a good seller, so they added that up there. Again, same idea with the cover art, the illustration, blurb, logo. This one costs $6.95. Cover illustration by Rick Lovell. That's the same guy that did Mohawk, by the way. And there's your dot matrix rectangle. And you notice also like the drop shadow on these titles, but the shadow is in gray. So this is the look and feel. I mean, this screams 1980s to me. Like, do books get any more 1980s than these books? I don't think so. I can't think of any. And it's just, that's what they were. And Lorraine Louie, who sadly died I think in her 40s of breast cancer and way too young. She really defined this look. The vintage contemporaries obviously were popular because they kept being published all through the 80s, 90s, into the 2000s, and I'm pretty sure they're still published today. But the look changed. So let me show you for comparison how they sort of began to develop. So one of the big changes was they used full illustrations on the front cover. So here's a Don DeLillo novel, Players, and now the cover art takes up the whole thing. So instead of looking like it's part of a series, the books start to look more individuated, I guess. And it still has the logo here, looks roughly the same. You still have some of these little 80s color rectangles. Here's what the spines look like. All right. So that's looking pretty similar. Back cover looks pretty similar. And the date on this DeLillo novel, 1989. So by the late 80s, they were sort of shifting the look, but preserving some of the branding. Same thing goes here for this Don DeLillo book, Running Dog. You get a blurb, you get this stuff, you can see it's in the same family as the older titles, but now the cover art is more the main attraction. Same for this Don DeLillo book, Ratner Star, Vintage Contemporaries. These would all be late 80s editions, I'm sure, 89. Here's a Richard Russo, The Risk Pool. Notice the difference. Right? Different. I still like this look. To me, when I think vintage contemporaries, I think of these white covers where the illustration is sort of shrunk down. But these are pretty attractive too. Cover design still being done by Lorraine Louie in 1989. Here's a Harold Brodkey short story collection, First Love and Other Sorrows. (1985). So even by 1985, some of the look was changing. That's very interesting to me. I wonder how many other 1985 titles were changing the artwork like this. And here's Richard Yates' Revolutionary Road, a book I'm intending to read hopefully soon. And I'm pretty sure there's an earlier edition in Vintage Contemporaries that's more in this style, but this is a 1989 era cover, still being designed by Lorraine Louie. All right, so all these are 80s titles. The novel itself was first published in 61, so this is a reissue, but the first Vintage Contemporaries edition was May 1989. Maybe this is the first one. Here's a good example of that kind of surrealist style, and the cover artist here is Theo Rudnak. They're kind of evocative. Anyway, there you go. Vintage Contemporaries. As you get into the 90s, some of the more bold design features become more muted. They preserved some of the branding. They started using some gold band with in the logo, if I'm not mistaken. I probably have some of those in the house somewhere, but I couldn't dredge them up for this video. I know we used to have some Anita Bruckner titles that were vintage contemporaries. I see them all the time. I think another major development with these books was these were trade paperbacks. So you're seeing a move away from mass market paperbacks to trades. And I think vintage contemporaries played no small role in that transition. And now trade paperbacks are the standard and mass market paperbacks are being phased out. Right? But yeah, I'm curious if any of you are collectors of vintage contemporaries. What do you think of the book design? Do you like that 80s throwback look? I wonder if that style is going to come back in book design or not. So that's about it for this episode of Great Books, Big Ideas. Check out those links in the show description. You'll get a little bit more background on the book designer and the influence that these books had. And I think there were mixed reactions to these book cover designs. They definitely are dated, but I think sometimes that's not a bad thing. I just have memories of being in the 80s. I had some of these titles myself. I would go to friends' houses. They would have different books on their shelves that were vintage contemporaries. One friend in particular, I think, was really into them. She was reading a lot. And I just have happy memories of this being like a revivified paperback format so that it felt fresh. It felt fresh. That's what these spoke to me. Like you would get introduced to new authors like Don DeLillo, like Richard Russo, like Mona Simpson, and they had authors like Thomas McGuane, Joy Williams, Ann Beatty, Richard Ford, Cormac McCarthy was in here. You have, even in reprints, they had Jerzy Kaczynski, Mary Gateskill. I remember Bad Behavior. I think I used to have that title. They did multiple Raymond Carver titles, lots of Don DeLillo. Andre Dubus II, Nicholson Baker showed up in Vintage Contemporaries, Anita Bruckner, Alice Munro, Ursula Hagee, Thomas Sanchez, Amy Tan, Larry Brown, John Edgar Wideman, Sandra Cisneros, Tony Cade Gambara, Edward Gaines, Ted Mooney, Gloria Naylor, and on it goes. There's like a whole huge stable. Some of these are pretty obscure authors. Some of them were famous. Some of them became famous thanks to Vintage Contemporaries. This series was a real sort of gateway into contemporary fiction. And for that, I have to thank that publisher. Question for you all is Vintage Contemporary still going? And if you do have some recent Vintage Contemporary titles, have they preserved any of the book design elements? Has the logo changed? Can you still tell it belongs to the same family as the earlier 80s and late 80s editions like this? That is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this little walk down memory lane back to the 1980s when trade fiction was like the cool 80s thing to be into. Thanks for watching. Bye.